The town of Hollow Creek had seen better days. Dust devils danced through empty streets where prosperity once lived, and the summer heat pressed down like a coffin lid. 3 failed harvests had turned neighbors into strangers, and strangers into enemies. Someone had to be blamed, and blame always found the outsider first. Sarah Blackwood arrived in spring with nothing but a worn leather satchel and knowledge that frightened simple folk. She could predict rain by watching birds, heal festering wounds with poultices made from desert plants, and worst of all, she read books. In a town where most people signed their names with an X, education looked like sorcery. When she saved Mayor Hutchins' daughter from fever using herbs and whispered prayers, some called it a miracle. Others whispered darker words. The drought continued. Cattle died in the fields, their ribs showing through hide like prison bars. Wells ran dry. Children cried themselves to sleep with empty bellies. Every Sunday, Reverend Colt preached about sins bringing judgment, his eyes always drifting toward the small cabin where Sarah lived alone on the edge of town. His sermons grew louder, more pointed, more dangerous. Then came the night that sealed her fate. Thomas Reed's barn caught fire, destroying his entire wheat store for winter. He swore he saw a shadow near the building just before the flames erupted, a woman's shape that moved wrong, too fluid, too quick. By morning, a dozen people remembered seeing Sarah walking at odd hours. By noon, those memories had transformed into certainty. By evening, a mob had formed. They came for her at sunset, 20 men with torches and rope. Sheriff Porter led them, though his hands shook and his face showed doubt. He had known Sarah, had shared meals with her, had seen her kindness. But the crowd behind him screamed for justice, and a lawman who stood against the mob would hang beside the accused. So he knocked on her door and read charges from a paper that trembled in his grip. Sarah didn't run. She stood in her doorway, straight-backed and calm, meeting their hatred with steady eyes. She denied nothing because there was nothing to deny. She had healed their sick, predicted their weather, and lived her quiet life. If they chose to call that witchcraft, no words of hers would change their minds. Fear had made them deaf to reason. They dragged her to the town square where a pyre already waited, built from wood that should have gone to warming homes or building cribs. Someone had been planning this for days. The efficiency of hatred always surprised those who forgot how quickly civilization could peel away to reveal the beast beneath. They bound her to the central post with rope that bit into her wrists, and she did not beg. Her silence enraged them more than any protest could have. Reverend Colt approached with his Bible held high, offering one last chance at confession. Confess to bargains with the devil, confess to bringing drought and pestilence, confess to every sin their frightened hearts imagined. His voice boomed across the square, performing for the crowd, each word another nail in her coffin. Sarah looked at him with something like pity and said only 5 words that would echo through the years to come, "You will regret this night." They took it as a curse. The mob roared. Someone thrust a torch into the kindling at her feet. Orange flames licked upward, hungry and eager, catching on dry wood with terrible speed. Smoke rose in black columns toward a sky turning purple with dusk. The crowd backed away from the heat, faces lit by dancing firelight, watching with the sick fascination of those who have abandoned their humanity and not yet realized the cost. Sarah closed her eyes against the smoke. The flames climbed higher, reaching for her with bright fingers. Heat seared her skin. This was how she would die, murdered by fear and ignorance, another name lost to history's long list of innocent victims. The fire crackled and roared, drowning out everything else. Until they heard the hoofbeats. The horse came through the smoke like a ghost, midnight black with eyes that reflected firelight like molten copper. Its rider sat tall in the saddle, a figure in a long duster coat dark as dried blood, hat pulled low over features hidden in shadow. The crowd's roar died in their throats as the stranger rode directly into the square, through their circle of torches, stopping 20 feet from the burning pyre. For a moment, nobody moved. The stranger's presence carried weight that pressed on everyone present, an authority that needed no introduction. One gloved hand rested on the pommel of the saddle. The other hung loose near a gun belt that held 2 revolvers with worn grips, weapons that had clearly seen use. The flames cast wild shadows across the rider's form, making it hard to tell where darkness ended and the stranger began. Sheriff Porter found his voice first. "This is town business, stranger. Best you move along." But his words lacked conviction, and his hand stayed far from his own weapon. He had survived 15 years wearing a badge by knowing which fights to avoid, and every instinct screamed that this was one of them. The stranger's head turned slowly, taking in the scene, the bound woman, the eager flames, the mob with their torches and ugly excitement. When the stranger finally spoke, the voice was low and cold as a January wind. "Seems to me you're burning an innocent woman. That makes it my business. Mayor Hutchins pushed forward, puffing his chest out with false courage. She's a witch. She cursed our town. We found her guilty according to law and custom. His jowls shook with righteous indignation, but his eyes wouldn't meet the stranger's steady gaze. What law? The stranger's question cut through the mayor's bluster like a knife through butter. Show me the trial records. Show me the evidence. Show me one single proof beyond your cowardice and need for a scapegoat. Each word fell heavy as stones, building a wall of truth the mob couldn't climb. You have none, because there is none. You're just frightened people killing someone different because it's easier than facing your own failures. The crowd stirred, angry murmurs rising like disturbed hornets. 20 men with torches against one rider should have been no contest, but none of them moved forward. There was something about the stranger that made violence seem like a very bad idea, a promise of consequences in every line of that still figure. Reverend Colt stepped up beside the mayor, his Bible clutched to his chest like armor. The devil speaks through many mouths. This stranger comes to defend the witch, which proves their alliance. We will not be swayed from righteousness. His voice cracked on the last word, desperation bleeding through his certainty. Behind them all, the fire climbed higher. Sarah had begun to cough, smoke filling her lungs, heat blistering her skin. Time was running out, measured in heartbeats and crackling flames. The stranger's head tilted slightly toward her, and though Sarah couldn't see the face beneath that hat, she felt the weight of assessment, judgment being passed in silence. The stranger swung down from the saddle in one fluid motion, boots hitting dirt with barely a sound. The crowd took an involuntary step backward. Up close, the stranger seemed taller, broader, more solid than any ordinary person. Firelight glinted off something metallic beneath the coat's edge, multiple weapons waiting in easy reach. This was someone who had walked through violence and emerged on the other side, marked by it but not broken. I'll give you one chance, the stranger said, voice carrying clearly despite its quietness. Cut her down, apologize for your ignorance, and disperse. Go home to your families. Tomorrow, you can pretend you were never part of this madness. A pause, heavy with unspoken threat. Or you can learn what justice actually looks like. Sheriff Porter licked his lips nervously. His hand drifted toward his gun, but he couldn't make himself draw. Every instinct for survival warned against it. There's 20 of us and one of you, he said, hating how weak his voice sounded. You can't stop all of us. The stranger's hand moved so fast it was barely visible. One of the revolvers cleared leather and fired, the shot echoing across the square like thunder. The bullet hit the rope binding Sarah's right wrist, severing it cleanly without touching her skin. Before the echo faded, the second gun was out, firing again. The left rope parted. 2 shots, 2 cuts, executed with impossible precision while standing in flickering firelight that would make such accuracy absurd for any normal shooter. Care to test how many more shots I have? The stranger asked, both guns now aimed at the crowd with steady hands. Or how fast I can reload. Or whether I miss what I aim at. The questions hung in the air, rhetorical and terrifying. The woman goes free. Anyone disagrees, step forward. I'll be happy to discuss it. Nobody moved. The mob's courage had evaporated like morning dew under the stranger's calm certainty of violence. These were farmers and shopkeepers, men who talked tough but rarely followed through, especially against someone who made death look like a simple conversation. Their torches wavered, smoke drifting across faces that now showed doubt instead of righteous anger. The stranger moved toward the pyre. The fire had grown into a wall of heat that pushed back like a physical force, but the stranger walked toward it without hesitation. Flames roared higher as if angered by the intrusion, reaching up toward the darkening sky with hungry orange fingers. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the figure in the long coat approached the inferno that should have been impossible to enter. Sarah had collapsed against the post, her feet still bound, body racked with coughing as smoke filled her lungs. Blisters had formed on her exposed skin, and her dress was beginning to char at the edges. She could barely see through the tears streaming from her burning eyes, but she registered the shape moving through the wall of fire, a shadow darker than the smoke, coming closer with impossible determination. The stranger's coat began to smoke as flames licked at its edges, but the figure didn't slow. One boot kicked through burning wood, scattering embers in bright arcs. The second gun went back into its holster, and a knife appeared instead, long and wickedly sharp, its blade reflecting firelight in dancing patterns. The stranger dropped to one knee beside Sarah, apparently immune to the heat that would have driven any normal person back screaming. Hold still, the stranger said, voice close to her ear, and Sarah felt the knife saw through the rope around her ankles. The binding fell away. Strong hands gripped her waist, lifting her with surprising gentleness despite the urgency of their situation. Arms around my neck. Hold tight and trust me. Sarah's arms felt weak as water, but she managed to lock them behind the stranger's neck. Her rescuer stood smoothly, cradling her against a chest that felt solid as oak, and turned back toward the wall of flames they had entered through. The fire seemed even more intense now, fed by its own heat and the wind it created, a living thing determined to consume everything in its reach. For a heartbeat, the stranger paused at the fire's edge, and Sarah felt muscles tense beneath the coat. Then they moved, exploding through the flames with a speed that stole her breath. Heat washed over them both, terrible and searing, but it lasted only seconds. They burst through the other side in a shower of sparks and smoke, the stranger's coat actually ablaze in two places now, small fires that climbed toward the shoulders. The horse was there immediately, as if it had anticipated exactly where its rider would emerge. The stranger laid Sarah across the saddle with one smooth motion, then swung up behind her, strong arm encircling her waist to hold her secure. Only then did the rider beat at the burning coat with a gloved hand, extinguishing the flames with quick, efficient movements. The crowd stood frozen, scattered across the square in a loose semicircle of shock. What they had just witnessed was impossible, yet they had all seen it. A person who walked through fire like others walked through rain, who cut ropes with gunshots in darkness, who challenged a mob without a tremor of fear. Their neat explanation of witch and righteousness had shattered against the reality of someone who made their violence look petty and cowardly. "Remember this night," the stranger called out, voice carrying across the square to reach every ear. "Remember how easily you condemned an innocent woman. Remember how you built that fire with your own hands, fed your fears until they became monsters. And remember that someone rode into your town and showed you what you really are." Reverend Colt found his voice, high and trembling with rage and fear. "You're both damned. Damned to hell for eternity. The devil protects his own." He brandished his Bible like a weapon, pages fluttering in the wind created by the still-burning pyre. "This proves she's a witch. No mortal man could do what you just did." The stranger's laugh was low and without humor. "Keep telling yourself that, Reverend. Keep blaming devils and witches for the evil that comes from your own hearts. It won't make you sleep any better at night, but it might help you avoid looking in mirrors." The horse began to back away, hooves clopping on hard-packed earth. "As for what I am, that's between me and my conscience. Something you should consider developing." Mayor Hutchins stepped forward, face purple with rage and humiliation. "You can't just ride out of here. We'll send for the marshal. We'll hunt you both down. You're outlaws now, criminals." His voice rose to a shout. "You hear me? Outlaws. Then I guess we're in good company," the stranger replied, turning the horse toward the edge of town. "History's full of outlaws who were just people standing up to mobs. Ask yourselves in 20 years if you were on the right side tonight. If you're honest, you won't like the answer." The horse moved into a trot, carrying its two riders away from the firelight and into the gathering darkness. Sarah clung to consciousness, her body screaming with pain from burns and smoke inhalation, but her mind was clearer than it had been in days. She had been saved, impossibly rescued by a stranger who asked for nothing and risked everything. Behind them, the pyre still burned, its flames beginning to die down now that they had nothing left to consume. The townspeople stood in small clusters, talking in low voices, arguing, making excuses, or simply staring at the ground. Some faces showed shame. Others showed only confusion that their carefully planned murder had been interrupted. None showed the righteousness they had carried into the square just an hour earlier. Sheriff Porter threw his torch to the ground and stomped on it, grinding the flames into dirt with his boot heel. He looked at the mayor and the reverend with disgust he had been hiding for years. "I hope you're satisfied," he said quietly. "We almost murdered an innocent woman because we needed someone to blame for our problems. And it took a stranger to show us what we'd become." He walked away without waiting for a response, heading toward the jail where his badge suddenly felt heavier than lead. Behind him, the mob began to break apart, individuals peeling away to slink home in the darkness, each carrying the weight of what they had almost done. They would not speak of this night to their children or grandchildren. Shame would seal their lips, but guilt would follow them like a shadow for the rest of their days. The stranger rode on into the desert night with Sarah in the saddle, leaving Hollow Creek behind. 3 miles outside town, the stranger finally slowed the horse to a walk and then stopped entirely near an outcropping of rocks that formed a natural shelter. Moonlight painted the desert in shades of silver and shadow, and the air had cooled from the day's brutal heat to something almost pleasant. The silence was profound after the chaos of the square, broken only by the horse's breathing and Sarah's ragged coughs. Can you stand? The stranger asked, dismounting with fluid grace and reaching up to help Sarah down. Her legs buckled immediately, strength completely gone, but strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The stranger carried her to the rock shelter and laid her down gently on sand still warm from the day's sun. For the first time, Sarah got a clear look at her rescuer as the stranger removed that concealing hat. Dark hair fell past broad shoulders, framing a face that was striking rather than beautiful, all strong angles and weathered skin. But it was the eyes that caught Sarah's attention, old eyes in a relatively young face, eyes that had seen too much and remembered everything. The stranger was a woman, probably 30 years old, though something about her suggested she had lived far more than those years would account for. "You're burned," the woman said, kneeling beside Sarah and opening saddlebags that had appeared in her hands. "Not as bad as it could have been, but bad enough. I've got supplies that'll help." She pulled out jars and cloth bandages, moving with the efficiency of someone who had treated injuries many times before. "This is going to hurt. No way around it." Sarah tried to speak but could only manage a whisper through her smoke-damaged throat. "Who are you?" "Names aren't important right now. Staying alive is." The woman opened one jar, and the smell of herbs filled the air, sharp and medicinal. "I've got a salve here that'll take the heat out of those burns and prevent infection. My grandmother taught me the recipe. She was a healer too, though they called her other things." A pause, heavy with old pain. "They burned her when I was 12. I couldn't save her." Understanding passed between them in that moment, a shared history of persecution and survival. Sarah nodded, accepting the explanation and the offer of help. The woman began to apply the salve with gentle fingers, working methodically across every burn and blister. True to her warning, it hurt terribly at first, a stinging sensation that made Sarah bite her lip to keep from crying out. But gradually, the pain began to fade, replaced by a cooling sensation that felt like blessed relief. "You walked through fire," Sarah whispered when she could speak again. "How?" The woman's hands paused in their work, and for a moment she seemed to debate answering. Finally, she said, "We all have things that make us different. You can heal with herbs and predict weather. I have my own gifts, though I don't advertise them. In my experience, being different is dangerous enough without giving people specifics to fear." She resumed applying the salve. "Let's just say fire and I have an understanding, and leave it at that." "They'll come after us," Sarah said, stating the obvious. "The mayor, the reverend, maybe others. They can't let this stand. It makes them look weak and foolish. Let them come." The woman's voice was flat, emotionless. "I've been running from men like that my whole life. Eventually, you realize running doesn't solve anything. It just means you'll be tired when they catch up." She finished with the salve and began wrapping clean bandages around Sarah's wrists and forearms. "Sometimes you have to make a stand. Tonight seemed like a good night for it." Sarah studied her rescuer's profile in the moonlight, seeing the scars that marked her neck and one cheek, old wounds from old battles. This was a woman who had survived violence and learned to meet it on its own terms. There was a hardness to her, the armor people built when the world proved too cruel for softness. But underneath, Sarah sensed something else, a core of decency that refused to die despite everything that tried to kill it. "Thank you," Sarah said simply, putting all her gratitude and wonder into those two words. "You saved my life knowing it would make you a target. You didn't have to do that. You could have just ridden past." The woman finished the bandaging and sat back, looking at Sarah with those ancient eyes. "Yes, I could have. Probably should have. I've got my own troubles, my own people hunting me, my own past that doesn't let go." She glanced back toward where Hollow Creek lay beyond the rocks, firelight still faintly visible against the horizon. "But I spent years watching innocent people die because I was too scared or too busy to help. After a while, that kind of cowardice eats you from the inside out. Tonight, I decided I was done being eaten." She stood and walked to her horse, pulling down a canteen and bringing it back to Sarah. "Drink slowly. Your throat's raw, and water will feel like knives at first, but you need it." Sarah obeyed, taking small sips that hurt but helped clear some of the smoke from her lungs. The woman watched her drink, then said, "You should sleep if you can. We'll need to move at dawn, get some distance before they organize a search party. In a few days, once you're stronger, you can decide where you want to go. I'll take you wherever you choose." "What about you?" Sarah asked. "Where will you go?" The woman looked out at the desert stretching endlessly in all directions, silver and mysterious under the moon. "Same place I've always gone. Nowhere in particular. Everywhere eventually." She settled with her back against a rock, positioning herself where she could see anyone approaching from town. Both guns were in easy reach, though she appeared relaxed. I've learned that home isn't a place for people like us. It's the moments between running when we can breathe without fear. This is one of those moments. Sarah felt exhaustion pulling at her like a tide, her body demanding rest it had been denied for days. The burns still hurt, but the salve had reduced them from agony to bearable pain. More importantly, she was alive, free, and in the company of someone who understood what it meant to be different in a world that punished difference. For the first time since Thomas Reed's barn burned, she felt something like hope. "I don't even know what to call you," she murmured, eyes already closing against her will. "Call me Jack," the woman said softly. "It's not my real name, but it's the one I've been using lately. Real names have power, and I've given away too much power in my life already." She pulled a blanket from her saddlebags and spread it over Sarah with unexpected tenderness. "Sleep now. I'll keep watch. You're safe tonight." Sarah wanted to respond, to thank her again, to ask 1,000 questions about this mysterious woman who walked through fire and faced down mobs without flinching. But sleep claimed her before she could form the words, pulling her down into darkness where flames couldn't reach and angry voices faded to nothing. For the first time in weeks, she slept without nightmares, trusting a stranger to guard her dreams. Jack sat watching the horizon, guns ready, eyes alert for any sign of pursuit. The night was quiet except for the wind's whisper and the distant call of a coyote. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles, but tonight, she had done something right. Tonight, she had saved a life instead of taking one. It wasn't redemption, but it was a step towards something that might become redemption if she took enough steps in the right direction. That would have to be enough. Dawn broke over the desert in shades of pink and gold, painting the rocks and sand in colors that made the harsh landscape almost beautiful. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and found Jack crouched over a small fire, heating water in a battered tin pot. The fire was tiny, barely large enough to serve its purpose, producing minimal smoke that would be invisible from any distance. Everything about the camp spoke of practiced caution, the habits of someone who had spent years staying hidden. "How do you feel?" Jack asked without turning around, somehow aware that Sarah was awake despite not looking at her. Sarah took inventory of her body. The burns still hurt, but it was a distant ache rather than the searing agony of the previous night. Her throat felt raw but functional. Most importantly, her mind was clear, shock and exhaustion having released their grip during the night's rest. "Better than I have any right to feel," she admitted. "Your salve is miraculous. My grandmother was the miracle. I just remembered her recipes." Jack poured coffee into 2 cups and brought one to Sarah, helping her sit up against the rocks. "We should move soon. They might not chase us today, but they'll definitely send word to nearby towns. Your description, my description, both marked as dangerous. The lies will travel faster than we can." Sarah sipped the coffee carefully, letting the bitter warmth ease her throat. "You didn't have to stay. You could have left me here with supplies and ridden on. Why risk yourself further?" Jack settled cross-legged on the sand, her own coffee cup held loosely in both hands. For a long moment, she stared into the dark liquid as if reading fortunes in its depths. "I told you last night I've been running my whole life. That's true, but it's not the whole truth." She looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. "The whole truth is I've been running from myself. From what I've done, who I've become, the compromises I've made to survive. Every person I didn't help, every injustice I witnessed and walked past, every time I chose safety over doing what was right, it added weight. Eventually, you're carrying so much weight you can't move forward anymore." She took a drink of coffee, collecting her thoughts. "Last night, riding into Hollow Creek, I saw that pyre burning and I had a choice. I could ride past like I've ridden past 100 other horrors, or I could finally stop running. Stop adding weight. Maybe even put some down." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Turns out, doing the right thing feels lighter than all those years of cowardice." Who knew? Sarah understood more than Jack probably intended to reveal. This woman carried guilt like some people carried scars, visible only to those who knew how to look. "We all do what we must to survive," Sarah said gently. "That's not cowardice. That's being human." "Maybe." Jack stood abruptly, as if the conversation had gotten too close to wounds she preferred to keep covered. "Doesn't change what needs to happen next. You need a safe place, somewhere far from here where people won't know your face or your story. I know a settlement 3 days' ride south, near the Mexican border. It's rough country, but the people there mind their own business. They don't ask questions about where you came from or what you're running from." "And you?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. You'll just deliver me there and ride on alone? Back to running? Jack began kicking sand over the fire, efficient movements that erased evidence of their presence. That's my life. Can't change it now, even if I wanted to. I've got enemies, Sarah. Real ones, not frightened townspeople with torches. People who won't stop looking until they find me. The longer I stay in one place, the more danger I bring to anyone near me. You deserve better than that shadow over your new start. Sarah tried to stand and managed it with only a little wobbling. The burns pulled uncomfortably, but she could walk. That was progress. What if I don't want to be delivered somewhere safe and left behind? What if I want to ride with you instead? Jack stopped mid-motion, surprise flickering across her usually controlled features. That's foolish. You'd be trading one kind of danger for another, except this danger follows me intentionally. Bounty hunters, old enemies, people I've wronged in my less enlightened days. She shook her head firmly. No. You get your fresh start. You find a town that needs a healer, live quietly, maybe even find some peace. Don't throw that away. Peace? Sarah laughed, though it hurt her throat. After last night, peace is an illusion. They'll tell stories about the witch who escaped, the demon who rescued her. Those stories will spread across the territory, getting bigger and uglier with every telling. Eventually, someone will connect the rumors to the real me, no matter where I hide. She moved closer to Jack, meeting stubbornness with her own determination. But if I'm with you, at least I'm with someone who can walk through fire. At least I'm not alone. Jack stared at her for a long moment, clearly torn between self-preservation and something dangerously close to hope. You don't know what you're asking. My life isn't romantic adventures and daring rescues. It's mostly riding hard, sleeping rough, and looking over your shoulder for the knife you didn't see coming. It's lonely and brutal and short. Then maybe it's time you had company, Sarah said simply. Maybe we both need someone who understands what it's like to be different, to be hunted, to have our kindness called witchcraft and our survival called evil. She smiled despite the pain it caused her cracked lips. Besides, you just proved you need a healer. That coat of yours was on fire, and I don't see anyone else around to patch you up when the next fight goes badly. Despite herself, Jack felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. You're stubborn. Says the woman who rode into a mob of 20 armed men without backup. Sarah crossed her arms carefully over her bandaged chest. I'm coming with you, Jack, or whatever your real name is. You can argue, but we both know I've already won this fight. I'm just giving you time to accept it gracefully. Jack turned away, ostensibly to pack up the camp, but really to hide the emotions crossing her face. For so long, she had been alone, convinced she had to be alone to keep others safe. The idea of a companion, of someone to ride beside instead of always riding solo, felt foreign and dangerous and impossibly tempting. If you come, she said finally, voice rough, you follow my lead when trouble comes. No arguments, no hesitation. I've kept myself alive this long by knowing when to fight and when to run. Can you accept that? I just escaped being burned alive by trusting you completely, Sarah pointed out. I think I can manage following your lead. Jack finished packing, then caught and saddled her horse with practiced efficiency. She looked at the animal, then at Sarah, calculating weight and distance. We'll need another horse. Can't run properly with 2 riders on one mount. There's a ranch about 15 miles east. Good people, won't ask too many questions if the price is right. We'll stop there, get you a horse and proper supplies for the road. She swung into the saddle and reached down to help Sarah up behind her. As Sarah's arms wrapped around her waist, Jack felt something she hadn't experienced in years, responsibility for someone other than herself. It was terrifying and grounding all at once, an anchor that might drag her down or keep her steady depending on how she handled it. Last chance to change your mind, Jack said as she turned the horse south. Once we start riding together, there's no going back to Hollow Creek or anywhere near it. Your old life ends completely. Sarah pressed her cheek against Jack's shoulder, feeling the solid strength there, the realness of another person who understood. My old life ended when they built that pyre. Everything from here is new territory anyway. She paused, then added quietly, besides, I think we both need someone to ride toward tomorrow instead of just riding away from yesterday. Maybe that's what this is supposed to be. A new beginning for both of us. Jack didn't respond with words, but she reached down and squeezed Sarah's hand briefly, acknowledgement and agreement in one simple gesture. Then she urged the horse into a smooth canter, carrying them away from the rocks and the remains of their camp, into the vast desert that stretched endlessly in all directions. Behind them, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of night's shadows. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and probably more hardship than either woman wanted to acknowledge. But ahead also lay possibility, the chance to be more than victims or outcasts, the opportunity to forge something neither of them had found alone. As they rode, Sarah found herself thinking about the townspeople of Hollow Creek, what they would tell themselves about that night. Would they admit their guilt, or would they reshape the story until they were victims instead of villains? Would Sheriff Porter find his courage, or would fear continue to rule him? Would Reverend Colt ever question his certainties, or would he preach about demons until his dying day? She would never know, and perhaps that was for the best. Some stories didn't need endings, just clean breaks. Jack rode in silence, her mind on the road ahead and the challenges it would bring. Having a companion complicated things, made her responsible for more than her own survival. But it also meant she wasn't carrying her burdens alone anymore. Sarah had her own strength, her own skills, her own reasons for fighting. Together, they might actually stand a chance against whatever came next. It wasn't the partnership Jack had ever imagined, born from fire and desperation, but maybe the best things always arrived unexpectedly. The desert swallowed them, two small figures on horseback disappearing into immensity. In Hollow Creek, the ashes of the pyre cooled and scattered in the wind, and townspeople tried to forget what they had almost done. But memory is harder to kill than fire, and guilt has a way of following people no matter how far they run. The town would carry that night with them always, a stain that no amount of preaching or praying could wash clean. But Jack and Sarah rode toward something else entirely, not redemption, not forgiveness, but perhaps the simple grace of choosing differently when the next terrible moment arrived. They had both been called witches by people too frightened to see their own darkness. They had both faced fire and emerged on the other side. Now they would face whatever came next, not as victims or outcasts, but as two souls who had found each other in the worst moment and decided to keep finding each other in all the moments that followed. The sun climbed higher, painting the desert in harsh light and deep shadows. Two riders moved through it, heading south toward unknown country, carrying their scars and their stories, their pain and their possibility. Behind them, smoke from a dead fire finally dissipated into morning air. Ahead, the road stretched on forever, and they rode it together, two women against the world, which suddenly didn't seem like such bad odds after all.